Poker's legendary champions, next generation stars, and tireless ambassadors of the game, sharing their wisdom and guiding your journey to high achievement on the green felt. This is Tactical Tuesday on Chasing Poker Greatness with your hosts, Brad Wilson and Jon Chai.
Welcome, my friend, to another episode of the Chasing Poker Greatness podcast. As always, this is your host, Coach Brad Wilson, and I am joined by my protege, partner, co-host, Mr. Jonathan Chai. How you doing, sir?
Doing good. I'm excited for this episode because they're not my hands.
Yeah, not your hands. They're my hands. So I've been getting back into the streets a little bit. You know, I think there's a I guess the way that I think about it, I've spent the last 3 years coaching, studying, researching, training other people to play poker. And in that 3-year period of time, I haven't gotten a chance to play very much because there's just so many, as you well know, right? There's so many responsibilities, so many things to do on a regular basis that take up a lot of energy that makes it to where like playing in the way that like I've always played just very, very difficult, if not fully impossible. But there's a story for those of you who are listening. There's a show that is one of my favorite podcasts of all times. Huge plug to Hardcore History. One of my favorite series in Hardcore History was a series that they did on the Mongols, just the Mongol horde. And there's a part of Genghis Khan's leadership where after like a year, so the Mongols, for those that don't know, they conquered essentially the known world at the time. Like they expanded, they were on Europe's doorstep when Genghis Khan died. And they would have absolutely kicked the living shit out of Europe had they gone in. I'm completely convinced. But they had conquered the known world and they had gone from this steppe nomadic desert tribe to that were very, very poor to the wealthiest group of people on the planet, right? They just had wealth, just lavish existence. And so in Genghis Khan's wisdom as a leader, he recognized that what happens when a nation goes from having nothing and being dirt poor to having everything they could ever desire is that they could get soft, right? Like the people that he's leading, the generals, that they can get soft, they can relax. And so like he recognized that as a potential failure point. And so what he did every 2 years was he would rotate his generals and his soldiers from, being at the source of power in Mongolia and having access to all their stuff. He would send them back to the steppes, back to the desert to spend 2 years as a reminder, right? This is where you come from. Life is hard here in the desert. Life is tough. So they would stay strong over time. So anyway, I mentioned this story because I think it is important that every now and again, the wolf general sends himself back to the steppes to do battle and recognize like, this is what it's like being in the streets. This is what it's like playing cards on a daily basis, dealing with the emotional highs and lows and investing the right amount of mental energy to the point of like you play a session and then your session ends and like you're just fried, right? Like it's hard to emulate that feeling. In my case, it's hard to emulate that feeling doing anything other than playing poker at a super intense high level for a number of hours. So anyway, these are my thoughts as it relates to like jumping back into the streets, putting in some volume and playing cards. Not going to be for super long period of time. I don't think. I'm visiting the steps to kind
Forest.
Yeah, I'm reminding myself like, how it feels to be grinding on a daily basis because like, frankly, this is what the Wolves are doing, right? They're grinding on a daily basis. They're in there battling, they're dealing with this. And so I think it serves them very well with me just getting a reminder, right? A taste of like, this is what it used to feel like to be in the streets. This is what they feel like on a daily basis. And so now I can just be a better leader for them. So that's my whole little story and preface for setting up this episode.
Cool. Let's see what you've learned in your time with the rich folks up there, I guess, not in the desert, just enjoying your lavish lifestyle. See if you might have gotten
So
soft, or
I
maybe
think
learned
that
something
that
new.
part of it is probably not the greatest analog takeaway for this situation, but being in the streets, thinking about different things, I think
Yeah,
is the
you've been in a different desert. It wasn't a
it was.
palace the last few years.
Look, I'll be honest, like it's a metaphorical palace, I think, because we're making a promo video for Wolves, or we're putting together. I've interviewed a bunch of them, and I just I think that when I look back on my life, I'm almost 40 now, and think about like the best times in my life. There's certain time periods that I think are quite meaningful to me, and this one that I'm in right now, these last 2 years, and this last year of running Wolves with you, um, is almost certainly part of my golden age of existence. I feel very, very blessed that like it's hard for me to envision 10, 20 years down the line being more fulfilled and happy to go to work than I am today, just bar none. So like in that sense, yeah, I feel like I do live quite a lavish lifestyle because I'm fulfilled. My values are met. I'm working towards something that I love doing. And I just don't see anything like better than that from a professional standpoint.
Yeah. No, I totally get what you mean. And yeah, I think like kind of like just all the joking and like the analogies aside, like I totally agree with you that that's what like Wolves has been for me as well. And I think it's like, you talk about sort of like stepping down and like coming back into the streets or something like that. But I also like think it's important to like, just because you haven't been playing poker doesn't mean that like, you haven't been like spending 24 hours a day thinking about like the best way to, play poker and improve and beat this pool, which is at the end of the day kind of similar. It doesn't require you playing hands, but it's, similar to like what all the Wolves and someone like me who still plays a lot of poker is doing. So
Hey, I just need to like show, like let's do like a duel and just show all the Wolves like, yo, like don't I still fucking got it, like
old man still got it.
you don't want me to sit down at your poker table, right?
All
Like
right, all right, all right.
you should still listen to what I have to say because yeah, I'm still quite ferocious in the arena. With all this being said, by the way, and this is kind of like impromptu setup, but for the next week, this will be on Tuesday, released on Tuesday, so you'll be listening to it. We are going to have Wolf Tryouts, which essentially is 4 one-to-one sessions with me, 4 private coaching sessions, and it's an evaluation as to whether or not I believe you'll be a good fit for the Wolf program. So if you're interested in trying out to become a Wolf and work with me directly, I only open my doors to one-to-one private coaching a few times a year. And once, I have like 3 to 5 folks who want to try out for Wolves and buy the coaching package, then the doors are going to close until, like the next quarter, maybe somewhere around February, March, April, something like that. So just, again, there's a few slots open. If you're interested in trying out, then head to Greatness Village or send me an email, brad@chasingpokergreatness.com, and I'll send you the link to buy the coaching package and we can get to work, right? Okay. All that said, now we have a hand to break down. So this hand is at 500 no limit. This was when in the first like few days that I was getting back. So played in the 500 streets. I've been playing 500 through 2K. Mostly, I think 1K though is a primary stake. So in this spot, the button, everybody folds to the button. We're playing 125 big blinds deep. 120 big blinds deep. They open 3x and I call from the big blind with trays. I don't think anything to kind of talk about there. Ace 5 tray flop. And I guess this is the first decision point because I automatically kind of go off the reservation. So what are you thinking here, John, on flopping bottom set, ace 5-3?
I guess I wouldn't have much to think about with my strat. I think I'm just doing a range check on ace high boards, and while ace 5-3 probably does slightly favor the big blinds range in the sense that like we probably have more combos of 2 pair here than the button does, considering that like we might have hands like we might go down to like ace 3 suited in our like flatting range, or 3-5 suited, and the button probably doesn't open those hands. Sorry, ace 3 offsuit and 3-5 suited. Considering the button probably doesn't open those hands. But all that being said, I think I would just still be simplifying my strategy here to range check, and pocket threes would just be a slam dunk check for me.
Yeah, like I can tell you the thought that I had in game was that like this board for the buttons perspective is going to be like a low frequency C bet, a lower frequency C bet, and typically going to use a bigger size is how the ace high, ace low boards tend to work. So I thought that like I would face a C bet at somewhat of a low frequency, and they'd be checking back like a lot of their like top pair weak kicker type hands, and those are really the hands that like I wanted to target for like 3 streets. I didn't think I could get like 4 streets out of like ace 10, for instance, because probably going to lose them at some point after I check raise the flop somewhere down the line.
And that's
so
what you mean by 4 streets is like a flop check raise
4
plus
bets,
two bets on the turn. Yeah. Or sorry, 2 bets on the flop, 1 bet on the turn, 1 bet on the
right, yeah.
Yep.
Play for 4 bets.
Yep.
They don't have many hands that want to play for 4 bets, honestly. So anyway, I opted to donk the flop to try to play for 3 bets. And I went half. Again, like here, I'm targeting their like top pair weak kicker region. That's the primary region that I'm targeting. They call, which is nice. Turns a queen of clubs, so flush completes. Flop was ace 5-3 2 clubs. Turn is queen of clubs. Now what?
Already in a spot where I'm
Confused because you don't
a little
donk the flop?
confused. Yeah. Okay, so like let me just like I guess just think about like what the buttons range is in the spot. I think their calling range is obviously going to include the top end of their calling range is going to be flushes. Maybe one category below that is going to be like their now 2 pair range, something like queen 5 suited or ace queen suited. Maybe a small smattering of middle set with like turn pocket queens. Think they have another category of hand that's below that, which is just like their top pair weak kickers, everything from like ace deuce suited to ace jack, ace king, all their 1 pair ace x. So not even top pair weak kicker, top pair good kicker. Do they have a low equity range on this turn? Probably. They probably still have like hands like 6-7, jack 10 of hearts, king jack of hearts, queen jack of hearts, queen 10 of hearts, 3 straight with a backdoor flush draw hands on the flop. And then I think that's like probably what that's probably what their range looks like.
They have a bunch of like pocket pairs in between like 6s through kings with a club.
Sure.
Those type of hands in their range as well. So with all that said, like I didn't think they had a ton of hands that would bet versus check. And again, like I decided to target their top pair weak kickers, which have now been demoted due to the flush completing, as well as their like pair plus draw region. Like I think that's the whole region that I decided to target on the turn. And in order to do so, I decided to bet small. Went a third. And I also think that like it kind of serves a dual purpose to where like I think that if I bet big on the turn, I don't want to play like if the money goes in here on the turn, I don't think that's great for my hand. So I didn't want to bet too big to create a situation where like when villains want to play for all the money, it's to my detriment pretty much always. So I decided to invest like a third size bet here. I bet 4 big blinds, so $20 into the pot into 63.
I think another way of like kind of saying what you're saying with your bet size here is that like you want to pick a size where should you get raised after betting the turn, it's to a non all in size, or it's like
definitely. Or not even like a non all in size, but not like an absurdly ginormous size, right? Like I don't want to bet like 90 and get raised to like 300. Like that's just that's a nightmare. So villain does choose to raise to 3x, so they raise to 60. Now again, like I'm not in the bet 3-bet business here with bottom set. So the question becomes like, what does their range makeup look like here? Like, well, what hands do you think are like raising the turn, facing donk, and then turn follow up on a flush completer?
Assuming that the button is reg, so I think the easy turn raises are just going to be flushes first of all. I think they're like a low equity raising range, maybe something like the king jacks and jack tens that call the flop with a heart that like turn a gut shot or something like that. Maybe makes sense. Wouldn't be shocked if they just didn't have any low equity raises on the turn, to be honest.
Neither. Yeah.
And I think there is also possibly like a small portion of their range that's raising the turn to check back the river. Maybe a hand like ace queen, ace king,
Ace
um,
five.
ace five. Yeah. So
I,
that's sort of how I would think about the raising range here.
maybe queen five.
Yeah, queen five. Yep.
Like all their two pair essentially. That's kind of like there's two categories of hands here. I think that are primary to villain. Number one, primary would be their flushes. That's obvious. And then the second would be their like two pair type hands that, or maybe their sets too, that are raising the turn and then like checking back on a lot of rivers, depending on the run out. So like that was sort of like my analysis on the turn. And so I called the turn. We get a 10 of spades river, which is not the greatest of rivers. And again, like when I thought about that range makeup on the turn, where they're gonna, where I thought they would have like a fairly wide amount of two pair that raises the turn as well as flushes. If I check, I feel like their two pair is going to check back quite often. And then I also felt like their flushes are going to bet an amount that is just not great for me. They're going to bet like, 160, maybe even over bet 210, 220, maybe jam like all 500. And I don't think like any of those sizes, like my hand doesn't want to really play for all the chips, I don't think, on the river. So to kind of like make it to where I essentially to make it to where like I want to play for the amount that my hand wants to play for, I decided to donk the river here too. And I think like in retrospect, I went too big. I ended up betting 90 on the river because I thought this was a size giving villain 3-1 where they just call with all their two pair. They can't really do much about it. And if they raise, I thought that they just don't have enough bluffs, especially on the 10 where, you just mentioned like King Jack as being like a potential hand. Well, like now on the 10, like them raising, they've got to like turn Jack 10 into a bluff, something like that, or like Jacks with a club that they decide to raise the turn with. Just hard for them to have bluffs when they raise the river here, which is like another
you're forcing their sorry, I was just gonna say you're forcing their bluffs to come from like unnatural parts of their range.
Right, which makes it to where like if they did raise, then it's just like quite an easy fold with trays. But yeah, that was my thought process in the hand. And again, I think I could have gone down to like 60 or so, but
yeah. I just want to, if I could like tie this back to like what we were saying, your decision to donk the river to like what we said their range was on the turn. So like kind of what this donk attacks is like the range that wants to raise the turn to check back the river at a high frequency. Hands like queen five, ace three, ace queen, those types of hands. While at the same time sort of allowing you to be let off the hook when they do have a hand that wants to play for all the money, right? Like the super strong flushes and maybe King Jack or something like that, because those hands are very likely to raise the river. So what you're trying to like accomplish here is like sort of like get the best of both worlds, like not lose the max versus their top tier hands, and still get their middle tier hands to put their middle tier hands that might not put in money themselves to haul $90.
Yeah, and kind of like importantly to me, like I also get to realize my equity with the trays, because I think my trays does have equity here, and I want to realize it, like pretty desperately want to realize the equity that my bottom set has. And I think this path just allows me to over realize.
And also I think if we bring in the quick note that we said about like, it's possible that they just have no low equity raises on the turn. I think like that, what that does is it makes it so that there's less opportunity for the button to bluff the river, if they don't have bluffs on the turn. And so like, I think when we can't really check and count on them to have like a bluffing region on the river, donking goes up in value as well.
Yep. So
what happens?
They call and I lose. So they call with the 10 high flush on the river. They pretty much snap called, didn't really consider raising. And I don't know, to me, even though I lost a pot,
feels like you won.
It felt like a win. I was actually like pretty happy the way that this hand got played and the hand that they showed up with on the river. I was like, okay, cool. Like, it's weird to say that I felt good losing a pot, but I did feel pretty good losing this one.
No, I know exactly this feeling. Like even the flip side feels terrible too. Like these are hands that like really keep me up at night, where I like don't value max with like the 10-6 of clubs and they have like a super strong hand, like a set. Like these are the hands where I'm like up wondering like, man, did I just leave $549 on the table, and
Yeah,
you know,
exactly. Yeah, like we ended up playing for like 35 big blinds or something. When it's like, man, like I feel like we should have played a much bigger pot.
right. Like if the stacks got in this situation, it wouldn't be shocking at all. Button versus big blind. So
Yeah.
I definitely feels like a win for you.
So I'm gonna have like another interesting hand on the river coming up after the break, and then so stick around. We'll see if another little unorthodox bet pays off. I consider this paying off, but again, this is you can kind of reach your own conclusion because I did lose the hand. So stick around after the break. Coming back at you.
Are you a lone wolf searching for the ultimate pack? The CPG Wolf program is a close-knit brotherhood hell-bent on one thing only: chasing poker greatness. Powered by bleeding-edge wolf strats and led by Coach Brad and his lieutenants, CPG Wolves are systematically prepared for almost any spot they'll encounter on the green felt. If you want to plug into an elite team and have a step-by-step game plan to realize your full poker potential, you can apply at cpgwolves.com. Space is limited, and the pack is only as strong as its weakest member. So only the hungriest, grittiest, and most driven will be accepted into the program. Applications are open at cpgwolves.com.
All right, welcome back from the break, and gonna have a little Jon Chai special here. We have a queen and a 6 of spades in the big blind, and somehow it's going to be worthy of Tactical Tuesdayness. You want to break down the action?
Sure. So this is one of Brad's hands still. Starts with a button open. We're playing 5-10, 2.2x, small blind folds. Oh, actually, my bad. Small blind's a fish. So they call. Brad's obviously not folding queen 6 suited in the spot. We put in the extra 1.2 big blinds, I assume.
See, this is why, sometimes might need some help with having a third party come in and read the action. So I actually decided to squeeze. So
we're getting weird from preflop.
Yeah, we're getting weird from preflop. So like the small blind flatting, I opted to squeeze with the suited queen. Preflop, I just think it's a hand that like obviously can complete, but I do like exerting pressure on small blind flats after the button opens and squeezing pretty religiously. So I go ahead.
So I got the button open right in terms of reading the action. Got everything else wrong. Great.
You got one. All you have to do is look at the actions and see what people are doing.
I was trying to predict. I just assumed the small blind was going to fold, and then once the small blind called, I didn't think anything other than call was on the table with queen 6 of spades. But don't hire me as a play-by-play guy.
Hey man, it's got. I can make like 2 4 straights, a flush. It's like incredible. So I squeeze the queen 6, the button calls, and the small blind folds, which is not the greatest of outcomes, but
we're gonna talk about the squeeze at all. We just this like
go talk about it. Talk about it.
You tell what I'm not. I would have flatted here with queen 6 as previously stated. I mean, what's going on here?
Yeah, I mean, I just think like versus a button open and small blind flat when the small blind's a fish, I really like 3-betting because one of the most likely outcomes that happens when I squeeze is that the button folds and the fish calls. And then I'm playing a 3-bet pot against a fish in the small blind when they have the top of their range kind of mapped out, right? They just don't have, or they just don't have like the whole top region, top left region of their range. If you're listening to it, like thinking about it in your mind's eye. And I think like, even though my hand is like, not the loveliest of hands in the world. It's a queen and a 6. Playing against a small blind here in this spot post flop is totally fine. Like I'm like, that's a situation that like I'm totally comfortable and an outcome I'm just totally fine getting myself into. Versus preflop 4-bet, I don't really care about queen 6 because I'm just going to fold to the preflop 4-bet. So I feel like, okay, like I'm not costing myself a lot of equity when I squeeze with this hand. And I think that like villains are going to be fairly straightforward. Like the button's going to be fairly straightforward with their 4-bets in this spot too. And they're probably going to lean towards flatting more than 4-betting because of the small blind being in the mix. So anyway, that's my rationale for squeezing queen six. We'll just call it right now like a mixed strategy. I rolled. I rolled. Do they roll high or low? I don't know how they
I don't know. And also, I'm sure there's a chart somewhere that lets you do this with queen six. So
probably not, because there's no chart where the small blind flats. So it's we're out in the middle of the desert. So we get the not greatest of outcomes of the button flats and the small blind fold. So now we're playing a big pot, a bloated pot, out of position versus a reg. But
top pair, baby.
We flop top pair, which is, this is, what else do you need? There's 322 in the pot. I'm going to give John another chance to do the play-by-play here. So first decision points on me. Top pair, weak kicker, backdoor, flush draw.
Okay, so
imagine that you squeezed with queen nine suited, right? There's essentially the same hand.
I think this hand could go either one of two directions for me. I think it would either fall into like a small range bet category on this board, so something around a third or a quarter, or would just be one of my stronger flop checks. And I'd probably look to use it as a bluff catcher. Yeah, so I think I'm, at the end of the day, I'm going to be bluff catching at some point with my queen. I think I'm definitely not going for like 3 streets or something like that unless I turn a 6 or something really good. So I would start out with a small bet or a check.
Cool. Yep. I went with small, quarter, villain calls. So everything is okay. Feeling pretty comfortable about the spot right now. Turn is a flush completer. So 7 of clubs. I think this pretty much makes our hands tied with our hand.
Doing a lot of checking on this turn card anyways, and queen 6 is gonna very easily fall into my checking range here.
Yep. So I decided to check. There's 41 in the pot. I've got 770 and villain has me covered. Turn checks through, and we have a Charles Dickens type situation. It's the best of times and the worst of times. We river 2 pair. That's the good news. The bad news is that this 2 pair comes on a 4 flush. So river is a 6 of clubs. Final board being queen 7, 6, 3, deuce with 4 clubs. Now what?
Okay, so if we want to check call here, what we need is the button to have a bluffing range, right? Which should exist, right? Once we only bet a third on the flop and they only call.
Maybe
assume that there are going to be like, but I mean, just like if I just think of like some of the hands that call the flop that would need to bluff this river, maybe something like Jack 10 of spades or sure. 10 9 of spades, 8 9 of spades, something like that, some sort of backdoor flush draw hand. Maybe they have something like ace 4, ace 5.
The problem with that is like those hands, and I mean maybe they just do, but those hands also need to check the turn.
Yeah.
Like the Jack 10 of hearts needs to check the turn, and like you kind of don't. If you have or Jack 10 of spades, like if you call the flop with Jack 10 of spades, a very small bet, and like villain checks the turn, I think the thing to do is generally to bet, because, well, you've made it a flop investment, and that investment can't just mean that you're trying to like make a flush every time, right? You're gonna need to bluff with that region of hands at some point. So maybe it's not an absolute frequency, but it feels like there is some removal there when they don't bet the turn.
Okay. So then the hands, it sounds like what you're saying then is that like the lower equity hands that check back the turn are going to be hands that probably don't want to get check raised, right? And that's the reason they're checking back. A hand like Jack 10 of spades doesn't care if it gets check raised. A hand like King Jack of hearts doesn't care if it gets check raised. So betting the turn is like bet folding the turn, is not a huge event for them. But maybe a hand like ace jack with the ace of clubs, or ace 10 with probably 4-bet ace
king
10.
Queen. I think
king
queen
of clubs,
jack,
something like that.
Jacks, 10s, 9s, 8s. The medium pocket pairs, I think, are hands that like they want to realize their equity. They want to make it to showdown, and they don't want to get check raised. So that was
I'm thinking about like low equity hands on there, like hands that aren't paired, right? Because for us to check call queen 6, we need some bluffs on the river, right?
Sure.
So like what? Yeah.
I couldn't find many of them in game. Like I didn't really think. I actually thought that like if I check and they bet the river, I'm probably gonna have to fold. Like that was kind of my thinking, was like hard for them to find a bluff, to have like a robust bluff region, and easy for them to have a bunch of value bets, like tens with a 10 of clubs, jacks with a jack of clubs,
Sure.
Ace queen with the ace of clubs, king queen with the king of clubs. Just that to me is like they're the hands that they value bet versus check. So I think essentially the way I thought about it was I hyper focused on the middle region of their range. Those pocket pairs, maybe 4s and 5s fall into this too, right? 4s, 5s, 8s, 9s, 10s, and jacks. That if I check the river, like my thought was, if I check the river, when those hands have a club, they're going to value bet. But when they don't have a club, they're always going to check behind.
Mm-hmm.
And so and even like the king queen suiteds, queen jack suiteds, ace queen suiteds, or ace queen offs, king queen offs, like when they don't have a club, they're going to check behind, and when they do, they're going to value bet. So because that was kind of the situation as I saw it, I thought that I could bet the river myself and get called by their jacks, 10s, 9s, and 8s that didn't have a club, while still getting called by their jacks, 10s, 9s, and 8s that do have a club. But like essentially I thought one bet needs to go in here. And how do I do it in such a way where they have hands that I beat, enough hands that I beat? And so blocking the river was kind of like the natural place that I found that I fell on. There's 481 in the pot, and I believe that I bet 158. So I bet like a third on the river.
Yeah. And so as long as villain calls with that pocket pair range without a club, I think you're right that it's like, it's very likely that you're going to be beating 50% of their calling range. So I think you can.
Yeah. Well, they're going to, like, every pocket pair is going to have 6 combos, 3 combos that have a club, 3 combos that do not. And when you factor in like the suited hands like king, queen, ace, queen, queen, jack, that I could also get called by, it felt like it was a spot that, I could value bet thinly. Maybe. I think that's the region.
So I think that last comment ties in really well to my last question, which was going to be, is the 6 on the river meaningful for you? Like, would you still be using this block? Okay. Because you're targeting the king, queens, and queen jacks without a.
Yeah. I did think rivering 2 pair was meaningful, because now I beat ace queen and king queen and queen jack suited. And gotcha. I felt like that was important.
Okay. So on the 8 of clubs, for example, you'd just be check folding.
Yeah. Hoping it checks through, but folding facing a bet.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah, that's actually, I like this a lot. I like the analysis a lot. I think, like you said, I do think hitting the 6 on the river is really meaningful, especially when we're kind of going for our, like, a really thin value bet like this. Like, it is, their king, queen, and queen jack combos are very likely going to come into play. Considering that, like, if half their pocket pairs have a club, half of them don't, then we also have to account for like some of the flushes that they get to the river with. How do we balance out some of the flushes with worse hands? Well, they need to start calling with king, queen, and queen jack.
Yep.
Yeah.
Nice. Yep.
So is this like one of those sad happy endings, or is this a actual happy ending?
No, this one's happy. They called.
Yay!
They called that.
We won the whole pot.
We won the whole pot. I don't have the whole cards on here, but yet. But they ended up having like 10 of spades, 10 of hearts. So they called with the region that I hoped would call the river 1/3, which feels
really good. Feels really good when you get called by that range, because like that's like, that would be like what I'm not sure about when I bet the river. It's like, there's 10s without a club call, there's 8s without a club call. So like seeing that hand call is probably like the most meaningful part of the range for me. And
it's huge.
It gives me the most confidence in doing this. Yeah,
you don't want them to fold and then look up the hand later and see that they folded 10 of spades, 10 of hearts, because then the value bet is like, oh my God, like that's just torching. If they're folding those hands and they're only calling with like their flushes, then this bet is like just torching.
Yep.
So pretty good ending to my adventure in the steps. And I think that's going to do it for this episode of Tactical Tuesday. Once again, Wolf Tryouts are open, limited time, closing, less than a week after this podcast goes live. So if you want to get in there, send me an email, brat@chasingpokergreatness.com. I'll send you the link. Or if you're in Greatness Village, click through the link that's provided in the university channel. And that's all I got for you.
See you next week.
Thanks for listening. to Chasing Poker Greatness. You can subscribe on Apple Podcasts or on your favorite podcast app. Go to chasingpokergreatness.com to get the newsletter, join the Greatness Village community, book a coaching session, or dive into the latest data-driven poker courses. Follow the show on Twitter at CPG Podcast.